what has happened, summarizing what has happened last night and yesterday with the new escalations between Iran and the United States. Iran suddenly said that we're going to close the Strait of Hormuz. And then, here is the situation right now in the Strait of Hormuz. Yesterday, it was the same. The picture hasn't changed since yesterday. And it seems that there is no movement in the Strait of Hormuz. And basically, in the southern part of the strait, which is the lane that the United States is trying to use, close to the Omani border, there is no vessel or tanker there. And in terms of the attacks, looking at the map yesterday, this is the map of Iran and the locations of the American attacks. You see, basically, in the western part of Iran, close to Iraq and Kuwait, because they were using HIMARS and ATACMS in Kuwait, and just hitting the targets in in the province of Khuzestan, which is in this area in the western part of Iran, and some targets here down close to the Strait of Hormuz. And it seems that they were using here close to Qatar in Bahrain. They had some, you know, HIMARS there that they attacked from there. As far as I know, it wasn't reported any sort of, maybe some little some little attacks from fighter jets, but basically the United States attacked Iran by HIMARS, ATACMS, JASMs, and these sort of missiles. And, this is and the other on the other hand, we had the Iranian attack on Kuwait, which is a UN. It seems that it was a UN base used by UN before, and Iran attacked that and hit the. This is the location that the United States was using these HIMARS. They were using, at the border between Kuwait and Iraq, and you can see how close that location is to the Iran, because you go up to Basra, and close to Basra is the city of Abadan. Abadan is the province that was attacked by the United States, the western province of Iran, Khuzestan, as they call it. And this, it was a UN base. It was reported that it was former UN base camp in Kuwait, and they were used. The United States, as I said, was using HIMARS to attack Iran from there, and Iran hit that with missiles and drones, as you see in this picture. The same location was hit by Iran. The other point was the attack on Iranian nuclear power plant. As you see here, the Bushehr nuclear power plant. In this picture, you see that location so close to the nuclear power plant. Many people were concerned about if something happens there because of radioactive, and how it can influence the country in the southern part and a whole Persian Gulf and GCC countries. It's not just about Iran. The whole region going to be contaminated by those radioactives. And the other attack, Iranian attack, was on Prince Hassan in Jordan. You see these two locations here, yeah, being attacked. The command system, the command and control, and the runway in the Prince Hassan Air Base in Jordan was hit by Iranian missiles. And the other attack was on, the one of the shelters of the American drones, MQ-9 drones. It seems, as you see here, they hit the target. This is the situation, Colonel, with what has happened last night. Basically, the two sides are intensifying. They're intensifying their attacks on each other. The United States basically using HIMARS and those sort of weapons. Iran responding with missiles and drones. The main objective is the Strait of Hormuz. The fight is going on as we talk. Moments ago, the Iranian foreign minister, the spokesperson of Iranian foreign minister, said As long as the United States is continuing the violation of MOU in the Strait of Hormuz, there would be no activities, there would be no movement in the Strait of Hormuz, and we're going to violate those terms as well. This is the situation, Carl. Go ahead and your understanding of the situation.
Well, we are witnessing the same tug of war that we had previously, basically. It's a continuation of what we have seen before. Trump is playing with both the carrot and the stick in order to have the Iranians doing what he wants them to do. As we have already discussed, the MOU it's just a commitment. It's a political commitment to a treaty. It's not a treaty. And this is very important to remember, because even if the three first articles of the MOU define that there should be a ceasefire and there should be a stop of all war activities, not just in Iran, but also in Lebanon. This is the mandatory part, if you want. All the rest is, in fact, conditional. And that's why it's very important. There were a lot of expectations in the West, and especially probably not in Iran itself. I mean, in Iran probably also, but I mean, in Iran, you had people who were very cautious about the MOU because they have read it. But a lot of people who support Iran in the West and so on said, well, that's an Iran victory and things like this. I cautioned against that because, as I said, only the three first articles are in fact mandatory. All the rest, and with a partial exception of Article 5, that affects the Strait of Hormuz, by the way. But for the rest, everything is conditional. Everything in every article, it said that the thing will be settled during the 60 days negotiation that should have happened after the 17th of June in order to have at the end a peace agreement, if you want. That was conditional. And obviously the Americans were not very keen to do these negotiations, and therefore they made every effort to prevent an agreement to happen. And that's one part. So we knew that it would lead to some difficulties. The next point is exactly what we have seen with previous agreements or pseudo agreements done by Donald Trump. Donald Trump is someone who wants immediate results. Even if he said, well, I give you 2 weeks, a ceasefire of 2 weeks, and you will remember that always the US always breached their own ceasefire. Because in fact, he gives 2 weeks, but in reality, he would like the adversary to react immediately and to find immediately the solution that he deems the correct one. So, in fact, the Trump in particular is under time pressure, while the others are not. And that's the reason why Trump doesn't even wait until the end of the deadline. He wants a result even before. And that's exactly what we are witnessing today. I talk about the Article 5 of the MOU because this is the article that deals with the Strait of Hormuz. But in this article, it says that during the 60 days of during which you should have the negotiation, during those 60 days, it's up to Iran to manage the transit and the traffic around this the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore the attempts from the US to influence Iran and to press Iran into a declaration, because apparently what Trump expected was an official declaration from the Iranians that the Strait of Hormuz is open. That's what he wanted to have. They tried on their side. I mean, the CENTCOM made some announcements. The US made some announcement that the Strait of Hormuz is open. But the Iranians have not. And for the simple reason is that it was set that Iran should manage the traffic for 60 days at least. I'm not sure exactly why and how this will be solved at the end, if there will be fees or toll or whatever you can call them. But the fact of the matter is that we had this 60 days deadline that the US should respect. And again, Trump is impatient, and that's the reason why he wants to press Iran into something that they are not obliged to do. So that's where we are. And again, we are in a tug of war. It's a tug of war between the ego of Donald Trump and the well, you can say some kind of stubbornness, but a legitimate stubbornness from the Iran. Iran has many things at stakes here. Obviously, Iran wants a peace, but it wants a lasting peace. And in order to have a lasting peace, it has to make its own position, let's say, credible. And that's the whole point here. Iran has to show that it will not, let's say, trade its sovereignty against any kind of advantage. And that basically also what before the 17th of June, the Iranians have said that the Strait of Hormuz was part of their sovereignty, the same as the issue of the enrichment of uranium. That's part of their sovereignty. And Iran has, I think, at this stage, the main thing at stake is to assert this sovereignty. And that's an additional reason why all these maneuvers or attempt from the Americans to press the Iranians is essentially wrong. It will press the Iranians to do exactly the opposite. Why? Because Iran has to demonstrate that it has sovereignty and it will use it. And that's what it defends. That's the purpose for Iran to fight. It's for its sovereignty. And so that's why you see that the American position here is a position of someone who doesn't understand its adversary. And that seems to me extremely worrisome. But this is where we are. So Iran is stubborn. I understand that. But I say legitimately because it has to assert its legitimacy. So we are in this situation, and Trump wants to demonstrate a success. He has so far only demonstrated weaknesses towards Israel, because at the end he also confessed that he was dragged into this conflict without knowing exactly what was at stake. And he also acknowledged, especially during the funerals of Khamenei, he acknowledged that he didn't realize that the Iranian people was so supportive to the government. So he had, in fact, that was something I've told you. Trump has been tricked by Netanyahu. Netanyahu has tried for decades now to drag the Americans into a war against Iran in the Middle East. No president so far has responded to that, or at least they haven't responded positively. They all refused to get engaged into a conflict for the sake of Israel against Iran. They kept the rhetoric against Iran, but they realized that it was not a good idea to start a conflict. Netanyahu identified with Trump the weak point. Trump is a weak point for Israel. That's the reason why Netanyahu managed to drag the US into the conflict. And now Trump realizes that he has been tricked into this conflict. That's exactly, and therefore now Trump needs to have a success. The MOU could have been an opportunity, but apparently, as we see, and as a lot of people say, the MOU is dead because the Iranians knew and they know that the US will not act in the spirit of the MOU. When we read the different articles of the MOU, you may remember that we said, well, that sounds extremely favorable to Iran. And in fact, that was the spirit of the whole thing. The idea was, okay, we give up, this war was a mistake. We go beyond that, and okay, we agree with what we say, and we try to find a midway, but basically that was a mistake. And that's what suggests the text of the MOU. But obviously, when it comes to the nitty-gritty of the negotiation, the Americans will not accept that they made a mistake. And that's where we are now. So all that was predictable. I think the Iranians expected that. And yes, we are in that situation.
Yeah. Colonel, just moments ago, what has happened that Iranian airplane, there is a blockade on, as you know, a siege on Yemen, and Iran has broken that siege before. But right now, there is a new airplane from Iran going to Yemen, and then you see the fighter jets of Saudi Arabia. They took off and they hit the runway of the airport in Yemen in order to avoid Iranian airplane to land. But Iranian airplane, as we see right now, they're landing in Yemen, despite having the runway being hit by Saudi Arabia by fighter jets. The footages are coming out, and I'm gonna play one of them for you. But uh, here we have the spokesperson of Ansarullah. It says, in a blatant act of aggression, the Saudi enemy targeted the Sana'a International Airport with a series of airstrike, thereby de- ending the de-escalation phase and bearing the consequences of its aggression. We affirm that this aggression will not go unpunished. It seems that I don't know if they're going to get back hitting some targets in Saudi Arabia, maybe Aramco or something like that. But this is the new escalation that is happening. I don't understand why is Saudi Arabia continuing with the policies against Yemen, because they have their own fragility, their own vulnerability when it comes to Saudi Arabia. And because they have their Aramco, their old facilities that can be hit by by drones, by missiles from Yemen, but they're continuing this siege on Yemen. What is your understanding of that?
Well, it's hard to understand exactly what's the position of Saudi Arabia. By the way, there have been many cases of airplanes from Iran to Yemen in recent weeks. And Saudis have apparently allowed that somehow. They had to show that they were aware of that, but they let this plane landing in Yemen. So there's a very ambiguous way of doing with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, I think, tries to play some kind of neutral role in all that. Remember that they attended the funerals of Ayatollah Khamenei, which is for a country at war potentially against Iran, which shows some kind of maturity. And I think we talked about this already. Even if it was a sub-ministerial delegation, nevertheless, they were there. And we have seen also that the Saudis have avoided to respond to those strikes against U.S. bases on their territory. Now, and that's not new. You know, the Saudi Arabia has protested against the U.S. because of their presence since the early 90s. And in fact, it was a struggle for the US to come in Saudi Arabia to attack the Iraq occupying forces in Kuwait in 1991. The Saudis were very reluctant to allow the US to stay. And after the war, the Saudis asked the Americans to leave the country and to remove their bases. And somehow the US managed to convince the government to stay. But the reason, and in fact, the reason of the US presence was exactly what triggered the jihadi terrorism. This is exactly what is the starting point. This is where you have people like Osama bin Laden and others who raised, and you had these extremists in Saudi Arabia who started to fight against the U.S. So the Saudis are perfectly aware of that. They accepted the U.S. because probably they don't want to antagonize or confront the US militarily. And that's the reason why they, in fact, accepted or tolerated, better said, the US presence. But essentially, they are not happy about this. So when the Iranians responded to the attack in February by striking U.S. bases, the Saudis didn't respond, as opposed to others like in Kuwait, in Qatar, and so they responded obviously against Iran. So Saudis are sitting between two chairs here. They don't want to confront the US, but at the same time, they're not happy about them. With Yemen, it's probably a more complex relationship that has probably a deeper roots in the local history and local culture, and that's probably the reason why you also have this kind of obsession of the Saudis against the Yemenis, even if, in fact, in Yemen, the Ansar Allah is on the right side, if you want, because they were the government were imposed to them. But it's another story. In any case, the Saudis, as I said, are sitting between two chairs, so it's very hard to understand exactly what they have in mind behind this. And there is another aspect that plays into that. It's the fact that, like the Iranians, the Saudis has also to have to assert their sovereignty. You know, they also have to assert this sovereignty. This is not exclusive to the Iranians. The Saudis do also. So I think and that, in fact, comes to the problem of the foreign presence, because we're talking about the US, but if you go in Iraq, you have the Germans, the French, and all those militaries that are also occupying the country. So this foreign presence is fundamentally destabilizing because it puts those countries into an ambivalent, ambiguous situation. They don't want to be at war with European countries, but at the same time, they don't like them and they are forced to accept that. And the population doesn't accept that. So you see, this shows the whole ambiguity of this foreign presence in the Middle East. And would the Europeans and the West, more broadly, if the West would be more wise, they would say, okay, we leave. Now we sign an agreement with Iran. Now we settle the conflict. We leave, and that's your problem.